You were never meant to die. That was the first and greatest deception whispered into your consciousness before you even learned to question the nature of reality. You've been subtly programmed to believe that this life, this brief spark encased in flesh and bone, is all there is. That when the body ceases, your story ends. That death is final, and anything beyond is mere wishful thinking, comforting faith, or primal fear. But what if that isn't the truth? What if the genuine reality has been obscured, not because it's lost, but because its inherent power is deemed too dangerous for your hands? Ancient civilizations didn't cower before death. They sought to comprehend it. They studied its mysteries, aimed to transcend its limitations, and meticulously encoded their discoveries into enduring structures, resonating symbols, and enduring texts that pulsate with transformative energy. Atlantis, Thoth, the Emerald Tablets, these aren't just captivating myths. They are the tangible remnants of a suppressed science, a viable roadmap to conscious immortality, deliberately buried beneath centuries of calculated misinformation. Now is the time to exhume it. Eons before recorded history, before the rise of Atlantis, even before the first empires and the pyramids that would later pierce the desert sky, there existed a civilization whose knowledge dwarfed the brilliance of distant stars in ways we can scarcely begin to imagine. Atlantis wasn't simply a legendary city lost to the waves. It was a vibrant nucleus of profound spiritual science, a place where earthly endeavors were interwoven with cosmic understanding. The Atlanteans didn't just construct temples. They engineered resonant structures specifically designed to interact directly with human consciousness itself. They weren't merely speculating about the afterlife. They meticulously mapped its intricate pathways and potential realities. They weren't blindly worshiping deities out of fear. They were actively collaborating with universal laws to achieve mastery over their existence, extending far beyond the confines of the physical body. Atlantean wisdom wasn't rooted in superstition or conjecture. It was a rigorously systematic and precise body of knowledge revealed only to those initiates deemed ready to responsibly wield its immense power. These weren't just stories told around crackling fires. They were powerfully encoded truths meticulously passed down through sacred geometry, crystal resonance, and vibrational hieroglyphs, a silent language of the soul. The highest initiates of Atlantis held the unwavering belief that immortality wasn't a fanciful dream, but a meticulously cultivated skill. To them, death wasn't a tragic and absolute ending, but a veil, a thin and penetrable boundary easily crossed with full awareness and intentionality. They underwent rigorous training to consciously leave their bodies, to retain their memories across countless lifetimes, and to reincarnate with purposeful intent rather than by unconscious default. The true tragedy wasn't that this extraordinary knowledge was irretrievably lost. It was deliberately concealed from the masses, hidden away from those deemed unready to handle its liberating potential. As Atlantis crumbled, whether through a sudden cataclysm or calculated sabotage, the priest-kings and highly trained initiates scattered across the globe, safeguarding precious fragments of their ancient wisdom within the very architecture of the earth. This is why the same potent motifs and sacred symbols appear in disparate cultures separated by vast oceans and seemingly insurmountable distances. That's why pyramids, structures of immense power and purpose, rise in Egypt, Mesoamerica, and even distant China. These structures were never intended to be mere tombs or glorified monuments. They were actually meticulously crafted libraries carved directly into enduring stone, initiatory chambers carefully designed to alter consciousness, activate the dormant energy body, and initiate receptive seekers into timeless states of awareness beyond the limitations of physical death. Now ask yourself this fundamental question. Why has mainstream history, so relentlessly focused on observable facts, worked so diligently to dismiss Atlantis as nothing more than a whimsical myth? Why is anyone who dares to speak of Thoth, Hermeticism, or the transformative power of vibrational medicine immediately mocked, marginalized, or outright dismissed? The answer is profoundly simple, because once you truly understand that death is not a termination but a conscious transition, you become impervious to control through fear, and fear is the invisible leash that keeps modern society compliant and conveniently in line. The moment you fully realize that you are not simply your physical body, that your consciousness survives the grave and has the potential to evolve beyond its confines, the carefully constructed systems built upon control begin to teeter and ultimately collapse. You cease to live in constant fear, you stop blindly obeying restrictive commands, and you stop passively accepting the artificial boundaries that have been arbitrarily drawn for you. Some of the most profound and transformative teachings on vibrational immortality are considered far too controversial and paradigm-shattering to share openly here. Subscribe now to our free newsletter, Insights Academy, through the provided link, and you will receive a complimentary copy of the Kabbalion ebook for a limited time. The Atlanteans were not just master engineers of colossal stone structures, they were also master architects of the human soul. They meticulously aligned their lives with the natural harmonics of the universe. They skillfully employed sound, light, and focused intention to elevate their consciousness far beyond the limitations of physical decay. They believed that the body was indeed a sacred temple, but it was also a highly sophisticated tool, a temporary vessel exquisitely designed to facilitate the soul's eternal journey. They left us the intricate blueprint for this conscious evolution, meticulously encoded in powerful symbols, resonating myths, and magnificent structures that modern science still struggles to fully decipher and comprehend. The cataclysmic fall of Atlantis didn't signify the definitive end of this profound wisdom. It marked the carefully orchestrated beginning of its deliberate concealment. When we speak of Atlantis in contemporary society, most people still conjure up the image of a lost island dramatically swallowed by the unforgiving sea. But the authentic essence of Atlantis never truly perished. It simply moved underground, infiltrating secret societies, embedding itself within hidden texts, and residing within the enduring memory of the very soul that you carry within you. You can detect echoes of this ancient wisdom within your own intuition, in those fleeting moments when you instinctively sense that there is something more to existence, something profoundly ancient, something you once intuitively knew but can't quite consciously recall. This isn't simply imagination running wild, it's a profound act of remembrance, a powerful reconnection to your own eternal potential. You've been erroneously taught to view death as a definitive deadline, an unyielding cessation of being. The Atlanteans, in stark contrast, perceived it as a doorway, a transformative portal leading to expanded states of awareness. And if you can remember what they intuitively understood, if you can consciously lift the veil of illusion and clearly see the elegant blueprint they purposefully left behind, then perhaps death isn't something to be feared and resisted. Perhaps, just perhaps, it's something you can consciously master. In the hallowed and expansive halls of ancient wisdom, one name resounds louder and clearer than almost any other: Thoth. To some, he was merely a mythological god, to others a remarkable mortal man. But those who have truly and diligently studied his timeless teachings understand him to be something infinitely greater, an immortal intelligence who consciously walked among mortals, skillfully mastered the illusion of death, and meticulously left behind a detailed roadmap for those genuinely ready to consciously escape the relentless cycle of birth and rebirth. Thoth wasn't rigidly bound by a single name or a specific physical form. In Kemet, he was revered as the divine god of writing, knowledge, and profound wisdom. In Greece, he became the legendary Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice great, an acknowledgement of his immense accomplishments. In the esoteric texts of mystics and accomplished magicians, he is recognized as the architect behind the arcane, the unwavering guardian of the sacred laws that govern not just the physical world we perceive, but also the vast and largely uncharted realms beyond it. His enduring legacy isn't composed of fanciful myth or unsubstantiated legend, but of tangible mastery and genuine transformation. The Emerald Tablets, traditionally attributed to the enlightened Thoth, do not read like standard religious doctrine or simple moral allegory. They are carefully coded instructions, intricately encrypted guides designed to assist the soul's transformative journey through the vast expanse of time, the multidimensionality of space, and the perpetual cycles of profound transformation. Thoth explicitly claimed that he had lived for thousands upon thousands of years, consciously moving through different incarnations by deliberate will, not by the random and unconscious dictates of chance. He spoke eloquently of stepping effortlessly outside the confines of the physical body as easily as shedding old clothes, of consciously traveling between vastly different planes of existence, and of intentionally returning to guide humanity time and time again. These aren't the incoherent ramblings of a deluded individual, but the authentic confessions of someone who possessed an unparalleled understanding of the deeper mechanics underpinning all of existence. In his profound writings, Thoth doesn't demand blind worship or unquestioning adherence. He earnestly requests genuine understanding. He doesn't speak of superficial salvation or divine intervention. He speaks of meticulously aligning oneself with a higher frequency, with immutable law, and with the underlying divine structure supporting all things. To him, immortality wasn't about desperately clinging to the illusion of physical life. It was about consciously transcending the limiting illusion of death altogether. He writes with unwavering certainty, "Man is a flame tenuously bound to a formidable mountain, but that flame possesses the intrinsic potential to rise above all limitations. You are not your body. You are not defined by your name. You are pure awareness temporarily condensed into physical form, and the very moment you truly realize this, death loses its oppressive grip." Thoth methodically laid out 7 fundamental laws, later succinctly known as the Hermetic Principles, which collectively form the architectural framework of objective reality itself. Mentalism, correspondence, vibration, polarity, rhythm, cause and effect, and gender. These aren't simply philosophical concepts or theoretical fluff. They are practical and potent tools waiting to be consciously utilized. Once internalized and skillfully applied, these transformative principles begin to systematically lift the veil between the commonly seen and the largely unseen. And when you consciously master the fundamental law of vibration in particular, you begin to intuitively feel what the Atlanteans profoundly knew to be true. Your inherent frequency ultimately determines your perceived reality, your achieved level of awareness, and your individual ability to consciously move between various planes of existence. Deliberately raise your individual frequency, and death ceases to be an impenetrable wall and consciously transforms into an open door. But here's what contemporary society has surreptitiously done. It has subtly stripped Thoth's profound wisdom down to superficial trivia and easily digestible sound bites. His timeless symbols are carelessly emblazoned on fleeting fashion items. His revered name is casually reduced to easily shared Instagram quotes, and his transformative teachings are routinely dismissed by academics who have often never even genuinely read or authentically contemplated his profound work. This is no mere accident or random occurrence. When profound truth is cleverly turned into a passing trend, it inevitably loses its inherent power. This is entirely the desired objective. Keep the truth readily available in plain sight, but skillfully bury it beneath a deafening sea of superficial noise and relentless distraction. And the legendary Emerald Tablets? They weren't specifically written for detached academics or the casually spiritually curious. They were meticulously written for genuine initiates, those genuinely ready to stop passively believing and instead actively start consciously knowing. Imagine for just a moment that everything you've been conventionally taught about death is fundamentally wrong, that the eternal soul is not judged or summarily erased, but simply consciously moves on, continually guided by what it has already consciously remembered and what it has yet to thoroughly learn. Imagine that you could consciously move forward with purposeful intention, not just passively drift along like a rudderless ship. Imagine that you could consciously choose precisely when to return, or even whether to consciously return at all. This is the empowering reality that Thoth meticulously presents. Not an arbitrary heaven or hell, not random reward or disproportionate punishment, just pure consciousness perpetually evolving, actively choosing, and consciously remembering. And that fundamental understanding irrevocably changes everything, because once you truly realize that you are far more than just a fragile physical body, that you have consciously lived before and will consciously live again, not by blind fate but by your own deliberate design, you naturally begin to take your current life far more seriously. You instinctively begin to live with greater purpose, clarity, and intentionality. You are naturally compelled to ask yourself the deeper and more fundamental questions. What specifically am I here to consciously remember? What essential part of the universal law have I consciously come here to master? And most importantly of all, How can I effectively free myself from the relentless wheel of unconscious repetition and consciously enter the eternal current of unlimited potential? Thoth never naively claimed that the transformative path would be effortless or simplistic, but he unequivocally stated with resolute conviction, it is undeniably possible. And for those who genuinely seek not with blind faith, but with carefully cultivated and disciplined awareness, the ultimate journey doesn't tragically end at the arbitrary point of physical death. It consciously begins there. Everything is vibration. If Thoth purposefully taught one profoundly significant thing above all else, it was this fundamental truth. Everything is fundamentally vibration. The universe isn't passively made of inert matter. It is actively made of dynamically interacting frequency. The world you perceive all around you, the fleeting thoughts that constantly flit through your mind, the powerful emotions that surge within your chest, they are all essentially vibrational patterns. When Thoth so eloquently stated, as above, so below, as within, so without, he wasn't simply offering a poetic phrase for contemplative reflection. He was providing you with the foundational key to consciously unlock the very fabric of reality itself, because once you genuinely understand that everything is energy vibrating at different speeds and resonant frequencies, you instinctively begin to perceive death not as a definitive ending, but as a conscious shift in wavelength, a subtle transition from one state of being to another. You've been erroneously conditioned to passively view your physical body as inherently solid, your finite life as rigidly linear, and your unavoidable death as absolutely final. But those are ultimately limiting illusions, deceptive tricks of perception, meticulously created by a state of chronically low-frequency awareness. Contemporary science has already objectively demonstrated that nothing is truly and immutably solid. Matter is simply energy condensed into a specific form that we can readily interact with through our conventional five senses. What you passively perceive as inherently physical is simply your individual consciousness dynamically interacting with particular frequencies. Consciously change the inherent frequency, and the corresponding form invariably disappears or instantaneously transforms. This isn't mere fanciful mysticism. This is demonstrable quantum physics. Thoth intuitively understood this profound principle long before we methodically gave it standardized names and assigned it to rigid scientific categories. He eloquently spoke of consciously moving effortlessly through multiple dimensions, of consciously accessing the very flame of life that burns eternally unseen, of consciously stepping beyond the limiting constraints of time itself by consciously attuning oneself to progressively higher vibrations. He didn't cower in fear of death because he clearly understood how to consciously bypass it, not by foolishly attempting to avoid it altogether, but by consciously tuning his individual consciousness beyond its conventional reach. Just like consciously tuning a radio from one frequency station to another, he consciously moved through the various planes of existence by consciously and deliberately changing his inherent frequency. Imagine if your individual consciousness were a unique song with its own distinctive rhythm, resonant tone, and powerful reverberation. Now imagine that this unique song isn't simply stuck on endless repeat within this limiting physical reality, but is actively capable of being skillfully played in infinite octaves across the vast expanse of time and space. The only genuine barrier standing between you and these higher realms of perception is your conscious ability to skillfully tune into them. This is precisely what Thoth profoundly meant when he wrote with such unwavering conviction that immortality rightfully belongs to those who consciously rise in vibration. Immortality isn't about the physical body living indefinitely. It's about the conscious self, your true and eternal essence, consciously ascending to a heightened state of being where physical death simply has no dominion. This isn't abstract philosophy or detached theory. It's immensely practical, profoundly powerful, and unequivocally real. You consciously raise your inherent frequency through what you deliberately think, genuinely feel, consciously consume, intentionally create, and implicitly believe. Your daily choices, what you consciously watch, what you deliberately speak, what you actively accept, they either consciously trap you in dense, heavy frequencies or consciously liberate you into progressively lighter and more expansive ones. The very food you deliberately eat has an inherent frequency, as do the conversations you mindfully engage in and the environments you intentionally dwell within. Everything either consciously lifts you to higher levels of awareness or consciously lowers you into states of greater limitation. And most people unknowingly spend their entire lives unconsciously tuned to the incessant static of fear, pervasive anger, chronic distraction, and the relentless demands of the ego. That's the limiting frequency of decay and ultimately the debilitating frequency of unconscious death. But consciously shift your awareness to all-encompassing love, profound truth, meditative stillness, and unwavering inner knowing, and you naturally begin to consciously rise in frequency. That's when things inevitably start to consciously change, not suddenly overnight and not with a single effortless meditation, but gradually, subtly, and progressively powerfully. You consciously become less reactive to external stimuli. You consciously begin to see directly through skillful manipulation and covert deception. You consciously feel subtle energy differently and with greater clarity. You consciously dream more vividly and meaningfully. You consciously sense when things are subtly off and when something is genuinely calling you forward. These aren't simply peripheral spiritual side effects. They are clear indications of a profound frequency shift. And when that highly beneficial shift consciously becomes sustained, your eternal soul spontaneously begins to remember how to consciously move beyond the commonly perceived limits of this world. Thoth didn't simply vaguely tell us this. He meticulously encoded this invaluable information into every intricate layer of his timeless teachings. The 7 universal hermetic principles are fundamentally vibrational laws. The emerald tablets are highly detailed vibrational maps. Even the revered ancient symbols like the Ankh, the all-seeing eye, and the spiraling vortex are all potent vibrational keys purposefully designed to trigger conscious awareness within the receptive subconscious mind. They are not simply ornamental decorations. They are sophisticated frequency tools of immense transformative power. And yet, contemporary modern life constantly works to deliberately keep you perpetually vibrating at a chronically low frequency. Unrelenting stress, heavily processed food, constant stimulation from screens, perpetual fear-based news, and debilitating societal shame. It is all deliberately designed to keep you firmly anchored in a primitive state of chronic survival mode because someone who is constantly vibrating in fear is inherently predictable, readily malleable, and easily controllable. But someone who is constantly vibrating in conscious awareness consciously becomes inherently dangerous to the established system, because when you're no longer instinctively afraid of death, you're invariably no longer afraid to genuinely live. You willingly take calculated risks, you fearlessly speak your authentic truth, you consciously walk a markedly different path, and you consciously step outside the oppressive frequency of blind conformity and purposefully into the powerful current of conscious creation. This is what true immortality genuinely means, not physically living forever in a fragile shell that relentlessly ages and inevitably breaks down, but consciously rising into a highly evolved state of being where your eternal essence, your individual awareness, and your immortal soul become ultimately untouchable. This is precisely what Thoth skillfully achieved, and this is precisely what you've been insidiously kept from consciously remembering, because the very moment you consciously do, you're no longer a mere cog mindlessly spinning in someone else's well-oiled machine. You consciously become the master architect of your own dynamically created reality. The soul is eternal. You've been subtly taught to fear death because you've been consciously taught to believe that you are exclusively your physical body. From the very moment you are born into this world, everything within the dominant society subtly reinforces the persistent illusion that the physical realm is all that objectively exists. Your perceived value is intricately tied to how you superficially look, what you passively own, and how much rapidly diminishing time you objectively have left. Life inevitably becomes a dreaded countdown to inevitable cessation. But the underlying truth is that your physical body is not your ultimate identity. It is merely your sophisticated interface with this particular dimension. It's essentially the specialized suit you intentionally wear while operating in this unique dimension, a convenient vessel for specific experiences, but it is fundamentally never the comprehensive story of who you authentically are. Consciously strip away all of the superficial layers, skin, bone, brain, and even the culturally assigned name, and what timelessly remains is pure consciousness, fundamental awareness, primal energy, and energy, by its very immutable nature, doesn't die. It simply and eternally transforms. Thoth intuitively understood this profound principle thousands of years ago, and he was certainly not alone in this enlightened understanding. The renowned mystery schools of Egypt, Greece, and even early Asia all purposefully pointed to this same irrefutable truth. The eternal soul is inherently immortal. It is pure light meticulously condensed into temporary form, and when the temporary form inevitably dissolves, the light consciously continues onward. It purposefully carries forward all accumulated memories, powerful intent, and continual evolution. You don't simply fade into absolute nothingness when your physical body inevitably dies. You simply consciously shift states, much like steam purposefully turning into mist. Your eternal essence consciously lifts from the physical body and consciously moves beyond the limiting material field. The only fundamental question is, are you consciously doing it? That's precisely what definitively separates the genuinely awakened from the passively wandering. Most people unconsciously die in a state of confusion, still desperately clinging to their superficial identities, their unfulfilled regrets, and their perpetually unresolved desires. And as a direct consequence, they invariably drift aimlessly, trapped within the lower realms of resonant frequency, unconsciously repeating lifetimes without clear memory, endlessly recycling the same unconscious lessons until something, somewhere, finally consciously breaks through. But those who diligently and purposefully walk the transformative path of conscious remembrance, who consciously raise their inherent vibration and consciously live in close alignment with the deeper universal laws, consciously move forward with absolute purpose, clarity, and intentionality. They consciously step out of the limiting physical body like a worn-out cloak and consciously walk through the next veil with full awareness of precisely who they truly are and why they consciously chose to be here. This is precisely what Thoth skillfully did. That's precisely what the highly trained initiates rigorously trained for. And that's precisely what you were never meant to consciously know. Contemporary modern culture has subtly sterilized death, turning it into a sterile clinical event routinely locked away behind closed hospital curtains and silent mourning. But the ancients, in stark contrast, purposefully saw it quite differently. Death wasn't a definitive end. It was actually a crucial initiation, a conscious test of resonant frequency. If your individual vibration genuinely matched the higher realms, you would effortlessly ascend. If not, you inevitably returned, not as an arbitrary punishment or divine retribution, but as a conscious necessity for continued growth and evolution. The soul is not externally judged in the way that you've been erroneously told. It ultimately evaluates itself with absolute and unwavering accuracy. It intrinsically knows when it's truly ready and when it's still significantly lacking, and the eternal soul is inherently honest, brutally so. That's why superficial spiritual bypassing never genuinely works. You can easily fake surface knowledge with skillfully deceptive words, but you can't possibly fake fundamental energy. The eternal soul meticulously records everything, and when the physical body inevitably falls away, the eternal soul becomes all that ultimately remains. You've already intuitively felt this intrinsic truth, even if you couldn't consciously name it or clearly articulate it, that profound sense of consciously being so much more than what you superficially see reflected in the mirror, that deeply rooted feeling that your conscious life didn't definitively begin with your very first breath, the powerful dreams that instinctively feel like deeply buried memories, the compelling instincts that intuitively don't quite make logical sense. The underlying pain you consciously carry that simply wasn't consciously born in this particular life, these are undeniably echoes of your authentic, eternal self, silently calling to you from beyond the veil of forgetting. You don't consciously remember because you've been subtly taught not to, but fundamental memory inherently lives within conscious vibration. Consciously raise your inherent frequency, and you will inevitably begin to purposefully recall. The eternal soul doesn't superficially measure linear time in years. It thoughtfully measures genuine growth, conscious alignment, and holistic integration. When you consciously suppress your deepest truth, it consciously slows your personal evolution. When you consciously align with it, it consciously expands. You've been subliminally taught to highly value relentless productivity, but your eternal soul genuinely values conscious presence above all else. You've been subtly told to constantly chase superficial security, but your eternal soul consciously thrives on perpetual evolution, and you've been surreptitiously conditioned to constantly fear the vast unknown, but your eternal soul was consciously born directly from it. The very thing you're currently most afraid of, conscious death, is something your immortal soul already profoundly understands. Thoth meticulously taught that death is ultimately a mirror, consciously reflecting back to you precisely what you authentically are. If you've unconsciously spent your entire life exclusively identifying with transient externals, conscious death will invariably feel like devastating loss. But if you've consciously built your life around enduring internals, conscious death will consciously feel like a well-deserved return, not a terrifying disappearance, but a profoundly comforting homecoming. The underlying truth is that the physical body will inevitably break down. That's simply the inherent nature of physical form. But the eternal soul is an inextinguishable flame. It only goes out when you completely forget how to consciously tend to its sacred fire. So don't passively let them consciously convince you that death is a menacing enemy. And don't passively let them consciously reduce your vast existence to a meaningless number on a transient birth certificate or a vacant plot in the unforgiving ground. You are fundamentally pure, energy, eternal, intelligent, constantly evolving, and the very moment you consciously stop living like a mere physical body that temporarily has a soul and deliberately start consciously living like an eternal soul that purposefully has a body, everything inevitably begins to consciously change. The Great Pyramid. We've been subtly told that the pyramids were nothing more than elaborate tombs, brutally built by forcibly enslaved labor, erected as grandiose burial chambers for vain kings obsessively fixated on their fleeting legacy. But this is fundamentally a lie. There isn't a single definitive body that has ever actually been genuinely found inside the Great Pyramid of Giza. No revealing inscriptions, no elaborate sarcophagi that convincingly fit the commonly promoted story, and no detailed decoration like in other demonstrably authentic tombs, just sustained resonance, carefully designed geometry, and a pervasive silence that speaks far more eloquently than any conventional textbook explanation ever possibly could. Because the pyramids weren't meticulously built for death. They were meticulously built for conscious awakening. These impressive structures weren't about superficially honoring the dead. They were carefully designed for the genuinely living, for those genuinely ready to consciously transcend the persistent limitations of transient flesh. The Great Pyramid isn't simply a superficial marvel of archaic architecture. It's a highly sophisticated vibrational instrument of immense transformative power. Its carefully designed proportions precisely match the harmonious golden ratio. Its deliberate alignment to distant stars is exquisitely precise down to infinitesimal fractions of degrees, and the carefully selected materials used, the strategically chosen angles, and the intricately designed chambers, all of it purposefully forms a comprehensive system of potent energetic activation. This wasn't simply primitive guesswork or haphazard chance. It was meticulously planned spiritual engineering of the highest magnitude. Thoth, often rightly credited with the conscious design of the pyramids, intuitively understood that authentic architecture wasn't solely about providing utilitarian shelter. It was fundamentally about consciously creating specific frequency. The Great Pyramid's meticulously designed internal chambers purposefully correspond to the successive stages of the transformative initiate's arduous journey. The descending passage, intentionally dark and purposefully narrow, represent the inevitable descent into the often turbulent unconscious, the necessary death of the false self that must consciously occur before authentic being can emerge. The Queen's Chamber symbolically represents the eternal human heart, the immutable seat of intuitive knowing, and the King's Chamber, meticulously positioned to resonate perfectly with Earth's inherent natural frequency, is purposefully where ultimate transformation consciously happens, where the initiate, skillfully aligned in eternal body, authentic mind, and transcendent spirit, consciously undergoes a potent vibrational rebirth. Initiates purposefully didn't simply enter the Great Pyramid to inevitably die. They purposefully entered to consciously remember. They consciously fasted, mindfully meditated, vibrated powerful mantras, and skillfully aligned their physical bodies with the deliberately designed geometry of the structure. consciously allowing their individual consciousness to deliberately rise to vastly expanded states of authentic awareness. This wasn't simply symbolic or metaphorical, it was profoundly literal in its manifestation. The Great Pyramid was a potent tool, just like a highly tuned tuning fork, just like a clear mirror, just like a purposefully designed doorway. And when consciously used correctly, it had the inherent capacity to consciously shift the receptive soul into progressively higher states of authentic awareness where physical limitations no longer applied. What Thoth consciously built wasn't simply a grandiose monument, it was a sophisticated frequency portal of immense conscious power. And that's precisely why its authentic function has been cleverly buried beneath layers of misleading myths and calculated lies, because if the masses genuinely knew that they intrinsically had the inherent power to consciously shift their individual vibration and consciously access vastly expanded states of transcendent being, if they authentically knew that they fundamentally didn't consciously need carefully controlled intermediaries, rigidly designed temples, or artificially manufactured doctrines, they would inevitably stop blindly obeying orders. They would consciously stop cowering in fear of manipulative death, and they would inevitably stop merely living in perpetual survival mode and start consciously remembering that they were purposefully born to transcend all earthly limitations. This is exceptionally dangerous knowledge to those in positions of unearned power. It effectively destabilizes the carefully crafted systems that consciously profit from your deliberate limitation. Look more closely at the pyramid's deliberate placement on the planet. It purposefully sits at the precise center of Earth's conscious landmass. Its deliberate height, consciously multiplied by a particular mathematical constant, precisely gives you the polar radius of the entire planet. Its meticulously designed base, carefully divided correctly, deliberately encodes the fundamental speed of light. These are not simple coincidences or trivial accidents. They are purposefully embedded messages in resilient stone, defiantly enduring the ravages of linear time, patiently waiting for those sufficiently ready to consciously listen. It's not simply an antiquated building, it's a sophisticated code, a carefully designed code purposefully pointing directly toward a transformative science that consciously has nothing to do with inert bricks and everything to do with pure consciousness. And this invaluable code wasn't merely built in Giza. Noticeable variations of it demonstrably appear across the entire globe. The deliberately stepped pyramids of Mesoamerica, the massive mounds of North America, and the carefully constructed ziggurats of Mesopotamia all consciously share deliberate geometric and energetic similarities. All purposefully point skyward, and all are meticulously aligned to powerful solstices, distant stars, and recurring cycles. What we superficially call myths are actually scattered fragments of a far greater and more profound truth. A powerful truth skillfully whispered across vast continents by those who consciously remembered. But today, most people passively walk directly past these magnificent structures without giving them a second thought. Eyes habitually glazed over, ears subtly deafened to the potent resonance pulsing beneath their oblivious feet. Because they've been subtly taught that these are nothing more than inert relics, not living tools, superficial artifacts, not purposeful instruments, irrelevant history, not conscious prophecy. But what if you consciously remembered what they were meticulously designed for? What if, instead of simply standing in awe of ancient genius, you consciously began to thoughtfully ask the genuinely important question? What positively happens when I skillfully align myself with this ancient code? The definitive answer consciously isn't found in dusty books or engraved plaques or superficial documentaries. It's profoundly found in resonant vibration, in intentional silence, in the serene stillness between constantly chattering thoughts, and in the peaceful rhythm of your deliberate breath as it skillfully mirrors the very pulse of the conscious earth. When you consciously learn to purposefully listen like the dedicated initiates skillfully did, when you deliberately stop simply passively looking at the majestic pyramids and deliberately start consciously feeling them from deep within, you'll genuinely realize that they weren't carelessly made of simple stone. They were meticulously made of powerful intention, and conscious intention is indeed everything. You genuinely don't consciously need to physically travel to Giza to skillfully remember who you authentically are. You simply need to consciously start recognizing that what was purposefully carved into lasting limestone was consciously meant to be skillfully reawakened within your eternal spirit, because the impressive pyramid isn't simply a superficial shape. It's a potent symbol of your own inevitable conscious becoming, a base rooted firmly in the material world, and a meticulously pointed vertex purposefully piercing the heavens. And when you consciously rise like it, you don't actively reach for elusive immortality. You skillfully remember that it was already eternally yours. Why don't we intentionally learn about all of this? If this powerful knowledge is demonstrably so transformative and profoundly beneficial, then why don't we routinely learn about it in traditional schools? Why aren't the Emerald Tablets skillfully taught in standardized philosophy classes? Why are the potent pyramids still routinely described as nothing more than empty tombs when the accumulating evidence strongly suggests otherwise? Because the underlying truth isn't intrinsically missing or irretrievably lost. It has been deliberately buried on purpose, not carelessly lost through time or circumstance, but carefully locked away for strategic reasons, cleverly hidden in plain sight behind the subtly polished mirrors of manipulated modern history, carefully crafted institutional religion, and rigidly dogmatic academic institutions, because a purposefully united humanity that consciously remembers its own immortality is indeed a humanity that inherently can't be subtly controlled. The deeper you intentionally look, the more glaringly obvious it demonstrably becomes. Across every dominant system, conventional education, organized religion, pervasive media, and even rigorous science, the very same manipulative pattern consistently emerges. They strategically don't want you to thoughtfully ask certain deliberately suppressed questions. They want you to blindly believe that the superficial physical world is objectively all there is, that you are simply a transient physical body, that life is nothing more than a constant struggle for dwindling resources, and that unavoidable death is indeed the permanent and definitive end. Why? Because skillfully induced fear invariably makes people inherently obedient and unusually compliant. It purposefully makes them relentlessly chase fleeting comfort instead of enduring truth. It strategically keeps them deliberately small and limited in their thinking. An individual soul that genuinely fears inevitable death will invariably cling to arbitrary authority without question. An individual soul that consciously remembers its own eternal nature inherently can't be mindlessly manipulated. For countless centuries, the enduring teachings of Thoth and the well-guarded secrets of Atlantis were thoughtfully passed down through carefully designed mystery schools, meticulously guarded by dedicated initiates, skillfully encoded in powerful symbols, purposefully disguised in multi-layered stories, not because the inherent knowledge was inherently dangerous in itself, but because the world had progressively become increasingly dangerous to those who consciously and skillfully held it. Empires purposefully rose to unwarranted power by skillfully keeping their easily controlled subjects in a state of deliberate spiritual darkness. The controlling church strategically silenced dissenting mystics. Narrow-minded scholars purposefully mocked the insightful esoteric. Legitimate secret societies were skillfully hunted, strategically infiltrated, and systematically corrupted. And slowly, generation by generation, the immortal flame of conscious awareness was gradually dimmed and subtly suppressed, but it was ultimately never entirely extinguished. It carefully survived in scattered fragments, in skillfully carved symbols placed prominently above grandiose cathedral doors, in parables that were subtly misunderstood, in traditional rituals thoughtfully passed down by those who consciously remembered, and in strategic whispers skillfully shared in quiet moments. Even in modern spiritual circles, scattered traces of it purposefully remain, although significantly diluted and noticeably scattered. You subtly see it in yoga, which was once a legitimate path to enlightenment and conscious awareness, but now largely sells expensive leggings and fleeting fitness. You strategically see it in readily available meditation apps that superficially offer temporary calm, but not lasting liberation. The inherently sacred has been strategically commercialized, systematically sterilized, and conveniently packaged for mindless mass consumption, because when you purposefully commodify undeniable truth, you strategically take away its lasting and transformative fire. And still, the manipulative system isn't yet satisfied. The established institutions that inherently govern your fundamental perception routinely work overtime to purposefully drown out anything that deliberately challenges their carefully maintained control. Openly speak thoughtfully about Atlantis, and you're quickly labeled as nothing more than a delusional fantasist. Thoughtfully talk about conscious vibrational awareness, and you're quickly written off as inherently engaging in nonsensical pseudoscience. But those disparaging labels are nothing more than skillfully erected walls, cheap ones at that, because when you consciously read thoughtfully between the subtly manipulative lines, when you mindfully listen not to what they strategically tell you, but instead to what they purposefully refuse to intentionally speak on, that's where the profound, real story thoughtfully begins. The timeless story of a conscious humanity that once skillfully knew precisely how to consciously transcend deliberate death, and was then strategically told to deliberately forget. The intentional suppression consciously goes far beyond simply controlling information. It strategically extends deeply into how you deliberately live, how you habitually think, and even how you habitually dream. You are subtly taught to constantly ridicule ancient wisdom while blindly trusting the very same institutions that are consciously profiting directly from your carefully cultivated and deliberately maintained fear. You are subtly encouraged to eagerly worship advanced technology, not deliberate intuition, to purposefully measure elusive success in meaningless numbers, not genuine alignment, to consciously fear inevitable aging, rather than thoughtfully honoring it as mindful preparation for inevitable conscious transcendence. This is fundamentally not authentic evolution. It is purposeful entrapment, and it has been strategically perfected over countless generations. But the unavoidable cracks are demonstrably showing. Individual people are increasingly waking up from their previously slumbering sleep, not simply because they're now being thoughtfully told to, but because they're instinctively remembering from deep within. Something profoundly deep within their eternal souls is insistently stirring, thoughtfully asking increasingly pointed questions that are demonstrably far louder than the carefully manufactured answers that they were thoughtfully given. Something profoundly ancient, something undeniably sacred, and something authentically Atlantean. And the precise moment that transformative spark ignites, the controlling system strategically starts to inevitably lose its carefully maintained grip. Because even a single, genuinely awakened soul can readily set fire to 1,000 previously slumbering souls. If you've ever genuinely felt as though you didn't genuinely fit comfortably into this limited world, like you were purposefully born with an inexplicable memory you consciously couldn't specifically explain, and like you were thoughtfully meant to purposefully do so much more than simply passively exist until you inevitably die, it's undeniably not a glitch or a random occurrence. It's demonstrably your eternal soul consciously resisting the oppressive program. The underlying truth doesn't consciously need to be thoughtfully taught. It consciously needs to be consciously recalled. The brilliant emerald flame of authentic conscious awareness still persistently burns. The deliberate path is still openly accessible, but solely if you're genuinely willing to thoughtfully walk away from everything that has strategically kept you habitually comfortable in the all-encompassing dark. This fundamentally isn't about carelessly rejecting accurate science or deliberately abandoning careful reason. It's about consciously integrating precisely what the wise ancients purposefully knew with precisely what we're now consciously rediscovering. Fundamental consciousness is the vast, final frontier to be explored, not cold outer space, not ultimately dangerous artificial intelligence, but primal consciousness. You are the transformative technology. You are the carefully designed code, and the sooner you consciously realize this immutable truth, the sooner the deceptive veil purposefully starts to effectively. So, to bring it all together, the core message here isn't about escaping life, but about truly living it. It's about remembering that you are so much more than just a physical body, that your consciousness is eternal, and that death isn't an ending but a transition, a doorway to even greater understanding and experience. It's about reclaiming your power, shaking off the fear that keeps you small, and consciously choosing to vibrate at a higher frequency, to create a reality that's aligned with your soul's true potential. I'm genuinely curious to hear your thoughts on all of this. Does any of this resonate with you? What questions does it bring up? Share your comments and questions below. I'd love to hear your perspective and join the conversation. And if this resonated with you and you want to explore these deeper ideas further, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on future explorations of consciousness, ancient wisdom, and how to unlock your full potential. Let's journey together.